Greetings, greetings. I see we got some folks coming in. Fantastic, fantastic. Manny, Mimi, welcome. All right. It's all right if you unmute just to say that you're here. Not sure what the turnout will be. If it's a few, that's fine. We'll have an in-depth conversation. If it's many, well, pardon the pun, then we will be able to collect a great many viewpoints. Either way, we're going to have a good time and a great conversation. All right. Give another minute or two. See who else we have. Fantastic, fantastic. All right, one more minute and then we'll get rolling. Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Welcome, Lama. Always a pleasure.
Hey, Chris.
Glad to have you.
I'm glad to be here, man.
You're here. All right. Without further ado, let's get rolling. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. All the folks that are joining live and greeting anybody on the replay. Appreciate you for taking the time and joining us here to talk about this topic today, practical AI governance for startups. So again, welcome to our webinar. We're going to have a bit of a roundtable panel discussion, a short presentation, and then an open discussion on this topic for AI governance and startups. This presentation is brought to you by the Cognify Insight Network. This is part of Cognify Solutions. We're endeavoring to build a community around our concepts, our notions, our view of AI governance, because AI governance is an important piece. We really feel rather committed to the notion that this is something that is impactful, this is something important, and it's a conversation that requires more than just one voice. So we endeavor to build this community with some integrity, to be able to pull in people who know a lot about governance, people who are just starting out in that journey, people who are just want to know more about how they can better use the AIs that are out there in their businesses with intentionality and in tandem with their with human agency and not as a replacement for it. As such, again, because we want to be intentional about this being a community, go ahead and come off mute, go ahead, turn your videos on. We want to be able to introduce everybody here so you guys know who's participating and can ultimately support one another. 15-second introductions. I'll start as an example and I'll call on you. I am Chris Feemster with Cognify Solutions, part of Nexus Systems Incorporated. We are located in the currently a little wet, a little stormy, hopefully not too loud, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, serving clients and partners world around. A fun fact about us, I suppose a fun fact about me, trying to keep it fresh. I may only have so many fun facts. I'll take an easy one. Fun fact about me is that I actually enjoy being on these. Getting started, getting to the start of the call might be a little bit difficult, but once we get in here, we start sharing this knowledge and we just have something to just dig into. I just become your typical nerd. So that's my 15 seconds. I'm going to call on Blama next.
Hey, greetings, everybody. My name is Blama Sona. I'm the founder of Web Collaborative. We're based in the greater Philadelphia area. We believe that we're here to unleash the untapped potential of individuals, companies, organizations, and communities to inspire ideation and creativity. I am the Chief Dream Officer of an organization that is focused on creating untapped possibilities. Fun fact about me, I got a chance to play with Anwan on the Sixers Stadium. That was awesome. So that was back in the day when you guys are in the street basketball. If you guys didn't know about anything about basketball, so that was great. We made it into the stadium, and so we're really big time hoopers in the coastal area. So that was awesome.
That is amazing. You are well connected, my friend. Okay.
A lot
Next,
of
I'm going to
stories.
call on I see. Keep showing up. Continue to share with the community. You'd be one of the more interesting. I guess I can't speak for anybody else. Well, you'll be one of the more interesting folks here. Next up, I'm going to call on Manny. Name, company, location, and fun fact.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Fear with Impact CIO Services. We provide Chief Information Officer services that include aligning business mission, vision, and goals with your technology. We are not a CTO, Chief Technology Officer. Those are very different. If you don't know the difference, let's have a one-to-one. I'm located in Maryland, just over the Washington, D.C. line, so effective, basically part of the D.C. metro area. No, we do not. Somebody asked me this earlier today. No, we do not have the National Guard in Maryland deployed. So that is over the line, and I am glad I'm on this side of the border. Fun fact about me, let's see, the week after 9/11, I was actually called into the FBI Counterterrorism Command Center, which was very interesting. We'll just call it at that, and scary at the same time. Worked on helping them with technology that vetted tip calls that came in. That's all I have. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you, Manny. Again, that's very interesting and fascinating. Moving right along. And again, if you guys haven't already, please feel free to put your links in chat and connect with one another. I'm reminded that, Manny, I think we want to go and powwow on something else coming up in the not too distant future. All
Oh,
right.
does that have something to
And
do with
next,
the email I sent you yesterday?
it might indeed, Manny.
You have a deer in the headlight. Look, did you not see the email?
I did see it. There's something else. A part of that and something else I want to
Okay.
brainstorm with you.
All right. Set up a time. Let's
Indeed. All
let's
right.
talk.
Here, here. Next up, Mimi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mimi Rosenfeld, and I am in Brooklyn, New York. And I work with a company called PMO Advisory that provides training and consulting on project management. And AI is becoming a bigger and bigger part of project management. And so I'm just trying to stay ahead of the curve and looking for ways to learn more about AI beyond all of the other packaged webinars that are available online to talk about real applications and issues related to project management and AI related to AI. And oh, fun fact. Somehow I don't feel like I'm a very fun person. But
Please,
I
Mimi, you'll anything you come up with was fine.
okay. What I will say is that I'm involved in a Zen meditation group, and as part of that group, I have been involved in setting up the ceremonies that take place, setting up the altar and preparing flower arrangements. So that just uses completely different synapses in my brain. For me, it is fun. So thank you.
Indeed. No, I thank you for that. This is actually fairly interesting. I imagine you would be very interested in having a conversation about being intentional and mindful about what you do and how you do it. Absolutely. No, that's beautiful. Now, I think that may be all for the live group here. We have a halfway decent replay volume traffic, but I tell folks you got to be here on the live, especially if you want to engage in that conversation. But that's all right. Folks will learn. So again, thank you for participating in this community. If you are new to this community, I will make sure that there are links at the end of the end of the presentation. If you are catching this on replay, you will find that in the description around this video. Why are we here? We're here to discuss using AI governance in a startup scenario where you are very tempted to move fast. You are very tempted to move, what's that old adage? Move fast and break things. Perhaps there are ways to move a little bit faster without being the bull in the china shop. And that's one of the things we want to be able to talk about, especially as there's a proliferation of AI startups, proliferation of folks putting AI agents, models on agentic workflows. There are more and more ways for this to be implemented into whatever your new initiative is. And some you may not even have a lot of control over. And there's going to be rarely a startup that's going to be able to tune everything from scratch. So we want to be able to give you some reasonable guidance and have a great conversation on how do you just practically implement this. All right. Let's start off with a brief presentation, and then we're going to have a Q&A. In one moment, let me switch my screens around. All right. Can everybody see this? All right. Perfect. Moving fast without driving blind. Practical AI governance for startups. We're talking about a framework for embedding governance into agile workflows from the very beginning. How you can ensure that at least the culture of mindful governance is part of your operations from the start. First, a anonymized hypothetical scenario. A venture-backed fintech startup raced to launch an AI-powered fraud detection tool that outperformed expectations in pilot testing. However, when they went to go pitch this to a major bank, they happened to hit the brakes, if we keep that metaphor going, because they did not have documented AI risk assessments. They did not have clear accountability for how this AI made decisions, and they had no documentation on detecting bias in existing data set or measuring that over time. Now, in this scenario, this was a 6-month delay that cost them the deal and valuable market momentum. I believe, like, hypothetically, because this is anonymized, this would have been early last year. And imagine if you were in that scenario, this wave of new AI ventures was something you definitely wanted to ride. That was part of the peak. I'm not going to say that's going waning anytime soon. I think we're still on heady times, and it's probably only going to keep going up for quite some time. But unless you are properly positioned to be able to respond to those concerns that a lot of larger clients could possibly have, this is going to be a problem. But isn't even the only one. Another cautionary tale I will throw in there is that of a mortgage company that, now this was an established business, but this could still happen just as easily inside of a startup. They wanted to find a way to ensure that the approvals and denials process, that the processes that they have were being done quickly and more efficiently. They didn't want to have to keep a large approval staff on payroll. They wanted to respond to a larger demand. So they implemented an AI system to go and work through some of this backlog. Problem is that, unbeknownst to them, supposedly, that this AI system was trained on data going back to the 80s, going back to the 60s, excuse me, 80s, the 70s, the 60s, the 50s. And if you think about mortgage lending at that particular point in time, in this particular, if you're an international viewer, you may not know, but in the United States, financial performance and financial preferences were not very fair. And this is something that this AI system had been trained on this large tranche of data. It's a computer. It doesn't know morals. It just went off to go do. And this became a huge issue. So, as such, governance, intentionality, and how you're implementing these systems is important. It's a moral imperative, as a business partner of mine would say. Governance as a strategic accelerant. One of the things we believe very strongly in is that this doesn't have to be red tape. Not at all. If you properly implement governance, it's about giving leaders and investors confidence that your product can scale without regulatory or reputational surprises, that you've implemented it, you've designed your business model with intentionality and foresight. So when done right, governance lights the path so risks are visible before they become detours or perhaps a full-blown crash on the side of the road. So One of the things we hang our hat on is the ISO IEC 42001 AI Management System Framework, and it does scale indeed. Three main categories we'll touch on: risk assessment, systematic identification and mitigation of potential risk, sitting down and understanding what your system is capable of doing and where it could run off the rails. Just sitting down and spending some time with that can put you head and shoulders above any other potential competitors who just implemented it, made sure it fit in the right APIs, using the right MCP, and they're gone. They're off to the races. Okay, they may have got to market maybe 10% faster than you did. Maybe they got 30 days on you, 10 days. But what's the risk that's now inherent in that enterprise compared to the risk that you're now mitigating because you're sitting down to do this? AI system impact assessment, evaluation of broader and societal stakeholder impacts. Again, 9 times out of 10, the system you're developing that you're implementing is going to have some external impact. Even if it's an internal system, such as the example of that mortgage lender, that's still directly impacting external stakeholders and it's directly impacting the community at large. It's important to sit down and consider that with some intentionality. And accountability. The thing nobody really wants, but at the end of the day, it's going to find you one way or the other. How's that old song go? Rhythm's going to get you. Accountability just might. So it's best to plan for it with intentionality and morality ahead of time. So having a clear line of accountability for a particular task that some of this AI system may be responsible for is important. Say if this is a part of this system is to ingest some of this data, who's going to be responsible for measuring the bias in this? If the job of this AI system could be making certain operations on customer accounts or other things affecting your enterprise, all right, is there a human in the loop here that's possibly overseeing this? Who can we reasonably give this perhaps burden of accountability, but that burden comes with oversight, the ability to say, hey, I have to put the brakes on this because this doesn't make any sense. Because this may turn into a big thing down the road. We need to talk about this before we release it. Again, these requirements are designed to be scalable, ideal for startups that need governance without enterprise-sized bureaucracy. In a startup environment, all of this may be one person. All of this may be between the founder and another person. This may be the founder, chief cook and bottle washer. It's important to understand that these, again, don't necessarily have to be overly onerous. They show how you can have intentionality in how you're implementing this system. And that's really the core of a lot of most governance frameworks. 4 principles here. Integrate early. We want to ensure that there may be some governance checkpoints, especially in software development, into your sprint cycles so that it's part of this development flow and not necessarily an extra hurdle. And we're going to mention some software related analogies, but does not merely hold true for software. In software, we have software development, we have sprint cycles where there's one particular thing we're working on. We allocate how much resources on this we want to work on. We throw ourselves into that sprint, step back and say, all right, what have we accomplished? What goals we made? What are some lessons learned? All right, let's go into the next sprint. From a process management perspective, that type of model still holds true in a lot of other industries and workflow methodologies. So take this and try to adapt this to your particular use case, your particular environment. 2, focus on critical risks. Prioritize issues that could threaten funding, customer trust, or product viability. Again, governance does not have to hit you like a train. You can sit down and say, hey, let's be intentional about some of these core areas. All right, so if we're looking at funding, what are some key concerns that our investors might have? Yeah, they want to see the MVP. Yeah, they want to see that we consider our competitors. Yeah, they want to see that we have a growth plan. But maybe they also want to see that we've thought about some real risks in this model. Maybe they've had other failures in their portfolio around AI already, and we can speak to the fact that we have some planning and risk assessment around this. Same for customer trust. Some of your first large customers will have the same concerns as some of your first large investors, and so on. 3, document with purpose. Maintain concise, current records that show decisions were informed and intentional. Again, I'm not saying you have to implement a whole governance, risk, and compliance system, though you can. There are some that are very approachable for small businesses, including one that we're working on. But if you at least include as any type of operational documentation that you have, and you really should, that might be a different conversation though if you don't, make this part of that documentation process. All right. And make leadership visible. Have founders and executive actively champion governance as a core aspect of growth strategy. Again, if you're doing it, you're doing it with intentionality, do it well and do it proudly. Talk about it. Talk about it with your other co-founders. Talk about it with your potential investors. Talk about it with your early alpha and beta clients. Make it clear that you have a leadership team that is intentional about this and is not hiding from accountability. That really is key in building up stakeholder trust. So, the Lean AI Governance Blueprint. If speed matters, you can still put a practical governance framework in place without slowing innovation. What does some of these rules and recommendations ultimately look like? Perhaps a one-page AI policy, capture the purpose, the principles, and commitments in plain language. Doesn't have to be super long, doesn't have to take you 2 weeks to put together. Just write it down, sketch it out, be intentional. Quick term risk assessment. A simple template to identify high impact risks at each major release. So one of the things about good governance is that it is a process. It is something that you revisit on a continual basis. So if you're taking this product, you're taking this service, you're putting this out there, as you iterate over your product, your process, your software, your whatever, ensure that you're completing the same kind of cadence. Has our risk profile changed? Has what our stakeholders consider risk has that changed? If we've moved from one market to another because we found, hey, our alpha clients had this behavior, but our beta clients seems like there's a big market over here. Has that risk profile changed as well? What affects them may affect B differently. And clear role ownership. Define who is accountable for AI related compliance decisions. Again, be intentional, be visible. At the very least, have that be well documented on who's looking over what. Even if it is yourself, the founder, chief cook and bottle washer, you may still want to write that down because hopefully you end up growing, you add some folks to the team. It's very clear that if there's an issue with this, they got to ask you. You bring in somebody else to say, hey, I want you to be our AI babysitter. All right, great. Is it well documented for everybody that the buck stops with them? Clear role ownership. All right, 5 essential components here that can be part of that. Hopefully that is legible. Let's try to get this all on one slide. Continuing on, another one of the things that you can implement is this rolling impact log. Again, so if you can maintain a shared, regularly updated record of potential societal, customer, and stakeholder impacts, that actually fulfills a whole line item under ISO 42001. If you implement that as part of the documentation we discussed earlier, that will still help you as well. But if you happen to just keep that rolling log, that's perfection. And quarterly governance sprints. Again, dedicate focused time to review risks, regulatory changes, and deployment lessons, then adjust controls before issues arise. Indeed, I'm glad I got to this slide. So one of the things that's an issue in this space is regulatory compliance. There is not any one mandate on AI, on the use of AI yet, but it's more than likely to happen. The federal government has taken a position, again, at least here in the USA, although there's a whole other conversation, a whole other presentation regarding the EU. We'll actually have that in a couple of weeks. But here in the United States, the federal government has taken a position that they're going to have a very hands-off approach to AI governance. So there's no federal statutes on the horizon. However, There is an allowance for individual states to put forward state level statutory guidance on the use of AI systems. So it's important to understand that in your particular state, whether or not that's on the horizon or if they implement this, that might be a reason to rewatch this replay periodically to help keep you on top of things. All right, so why does this matter now? Why are we banging this drum right now? Because moving without governance is like driving at night without headlights. You won't see the hazard until it's too late to swerve. I think that kind of speaks for itself right there. For startups, speed is survival, but companies that will win the long game are those that treat governance as a competitive advantage. It helps you build with trust with customers. It creates credibility with investors, and it develops resilience against those shifting regulations. If you are already being intentional about this, if you're already implementing this, if you're already documenting this and showing this, then with the rest of the industry, the rest of the sector, a competitor of yours gets hit sideways, either with an internal incident or external regulation, you're already on the ball. You're already ready to move. You're already ready to show your stakeholders we're more responsible than others in the market. That's a big deal. So turn on your governance headlights. If a regulator, partner, or customer called tomorrow, could you confidently show that your AI is safe, fair, and compliant without pausing development? If the answer is short, anything short of absolutely, it's time to turn on your governance headlights. Okay. And with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing. I'm going to open the floor to conversations because we're having, again, this is one of our roundtables, our panel talks. First, are there any questions? And if not, I can kick this off with a couple questions. Go ahead and jump right in. You may raise your hand, but jump right in. And
Yeah, I have a question.
yes, Blum.
Um, yeah, so how do we ensure that our AI doesn't inherit biases from historical data? What are some ways that we can do that from historical data?
Excellent question.
Yeah.
Indeed. So in those scenarios, one of the things that's critical to have is an idea of what you expect. There's an old saying, and I'm forgetting exactly what it is, but something along the lines of, if you don't measure it, it doesn't count, it doesn't exist. It's very similar to that adage among sales folks that if you didn't log the call, you never made the call. If you are implementing an AI system with an intention to use it on certain data or certain operations, have an idea of what success looks like. Have an idea of what a failure looks like. Have an idea of what that ratio is and what those signals are. And then run your model against that. Test your model before you deploy it and see if you can then verify that, hey, its performance, it's matching our expectations. Fantastic. We can call this automated. If it does not, if it starts to deviate, well, now there's a concern here. Some folks will see that deviation and say, oh, the model must know better. You don't know that. If it's not documented and you can't prove it, you don't know it, it's a risk. And it's important to treat it as such. So if your model say you get a model off the shelf and you can't necessarily pre-train it or change its training data set, at the very least, you know that by running this benchmark ahead of time, that its deviation from your expectations is now known. You can be aware of it and you can do something about it. You can go and make sure you're doing spot checks. You go and make sure that in the case of that mortgage company, any denials are gated to be checked over by a human, or vice versa. If you have a model that is in charge of making refunds to clients, all of a sudden is giving out, instead of $100 refunds, $50 refunds, it's giving out $1 million refunds, make sure that its successes are gated and handed off to a human to say, oh, not so much. Slow down right there. Yeah, you can't be giving away the shop and the block next door. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's very helpful. And I'm just thinking on the other side of that, what guardrails can we put in place to detect and correct them? early, especially early on. You mentioned spot checks and having humans in the loop, but what are some
Indeed.
other guardrails that you recommend put in early in place to make sure that we hit those benchmarks?
A very actionable way in a startup, a very actionable way to do this would be to sit down and consider some prompts that you would have for your model. Again, depending on how you're implementing the model. If it's a
Yeah.
chat-based model, consider some prompts for it. If it's a data-based model, consider some data input for it. Mock this up and get a reasonable sized data set. I'm not saying you, depending on what your operations are, depending on what your ultimate use case is, I'm not necessarily saying they have to be 1,000 different prompts or a sample size of 1,000 rows or something that you can plug into this, unless that's definitely related to the work that you're doing. But do this with some intentionality. Craft maybe a dozen different prompts a customer could come through with. Craft maybe 100 rows in Excel of sample data that you expect this model to run through and run through it. And then see what those results are and see if that matches your expectations. As a founder, the first big important thing that you have is your gut. Do a gut check on it and see if that sits right. And if it doesn't, definitely do a study into this. Try to do a statistical analysis into what you were expecting versus what you came out of that. And then you can use that to model your reaction to that problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Now, there are pulling pressures, right? When you're a startup, and you mentioned that you said a very famous phrase, move fast and break stuff. That's Silicon Valley. That's how things have always been done in the SaaS world, from my experience. But like in this, AI is very competitive. And if you're a startup founder, if you're especially if you're in a very competitive space, how do you maintain that balance? That's you mentioned like how many having enough data and going through that process as far as proper due diligence, but it's competition for funds, it's competition as far as getting market share. Like how do you stay competitive while also maintaining that process as far as being very thoughtful?
Indeed. That's an excellent question. Also, I'm reminded that this is a roundtable and I want everybody to participate. If you have an answer or a notion or a comment on any of the questions anyone's posing, please jump in. You may raise your hand, but as I'm getting into answering these or others might, I might not see it. So we're small enough here, you can jump in. For what it's worth, Blama, I would say, there's an old saying that if you don't like the rules of the game, change the game. So if everyone's valuing speed, make it a point to say, hey, we move responsibly. We move in a trusted way. We move in an ethical way.
Okay.
Let me show you why this competitor is falling on these benchmarks. Let me show you why this competitor has made questionable decisions in the past. Let me show you why this competitor talks the talk but doesn't walk the walk. And not to be overly zero sum about it, I believe cooperation is ultimately better. Sometimes you have to make a dramatic line in the sand, though. You
Yeah.
can ultimately say and establish maybe a community where folks can all come to the table, and you may be able to take the lead on this and help shift that sector toward
Mm,
a line toward a value set that you're starting to purport and that you can get investors on, that you can get early clients on. But yeah, if everybody wants to say, hey, immediate ROI, immediate uptick, all right, I hear you moving fast. This may provide value in this one way, but let me show you how we can be the long-term value, long-term asset in your portfolio. Because one of the things about investors is that they invest in a lot. They're looking for a lot, especially, and they're looking for that 10x, 100x return unicorn, but they know how many don't. Their portfolio is filled with folks who don't. If you walk in and say, from the get-go, we're focusing on sustainability. We're focusing on long-term value. We're ensuring that we're going to
yeah.
be that one spot in your portfolio that just keeps that's your bank. You may gamble on a couple of these other enterprises, but we're your bank.
Okay. Yeah.
You put your deposit in with us, you get in a return.
Okay, that's really helpful because if I think if I'm hearing you correctly, my mentors mentioned this, and they're doing that with
Hmm.
their startup is as far as just shifting the narrative. And contrary to what everyone else is doing, the idea of building a community, building thought leadership, but then also pointing out the gaps in the marketplace, some of the issues that can potentially be that can raise questions in the minds of investors as far as what they should be looking for. So that's what I'm hearing as far as building a community, building thought leadership in
Indeed.
that. Okay, thank you. Yep, that's very helpful.
Fantastic. Glad of it.
I have a related question. I have actually
Please.
worked in some startups, and yeah, there's so much focus on speed and getting out there fast, and also even
Yeah.
just like contorting your own vision to whatever client is sitting in front of you right now. So what I saw, and this is part of what attracted me to this presentation, is the concept of governance. It is the least sexy part of all management. Even for established
Indeed.
organizations, they don't take governance seriously enough unless they're constrained by regulations. So the world of AI may not
Indeed.
have regulations directly impacting them, but a lot of these AI
Yeah.
systems and startups are, in the examples you showed, feeding into larger existing businesses, and they might have constraints with regulations and compliance, definitely in the area of
Exactly.
finance, also in the area of health. And those are two of the biggest areas of
Hmm.
application for AI. So if you're going to be part of that
Yeah.
system, how do you build governance in from the beginning? How do you make governance part of the landscape that it's there to begin with? Overcome the fact that it's not sexy, but it is necessary.
Yeah.
So, how do we bridge that reality between, hey, it's AI, it's new, it's innovative, we're going to go in, move fast, and break things. And then it's, yeah, but then you have to clean up all that, the broken parts. So, how do you be organized? How do you include that level of planning into the vision? And again, that how do we make
That is
this
in
real? How do we make this realistic? It's not realistic unless you have those brakes and unless you have the headlights. That that's my vision of things. But I really want to hear what you have to say because you've been clearly looking at this in more detail.
no, that's you put it beautifully. You put it beautifully, Mimi. Honestly, a lot of that is why this community exists. And a strong core of that is why this brand exists. To be able to be able to show that one, governance can be done with intentionality and strategically, not just as an afterthought. And two, to help folks realize that there's an alternative to it, this just being an afterthought and a bolt-on. For what it's worth, I would say that the analogy that I've been using throughout this presentation and I've used several times, I might be a little biased too because I think it communicates this well. It's as if you have two people on the road. You have two cars going on the road. You have a dark road ahead. It's windy. You've never been on it before. No one's been on this road before. People have heard that this road exists. People have experimented with this road in the past, but the level of traffic that's suddenly been on this road behind you, never seen it before. Isn't it more wise instead of running down this road in a car in your Porsche, 80 miles per hour, 90 miles per hour in the dark, no headlights on, you've never been on this road before? Isn't it wiser to perhaps slow down, to take it at maybe 60 miles per hour, maybe 50, maybe 65, put your headlights on, see if you have a map, and try to stick to the white line a little bit? Wouldn't it be more wise to be that second driver? Wouldn't it be more wise for one's sanity, one's health, one's financial posture to be that second driver? I find that helps to clarify that pretty simply. So everybody drives, everybody knows that speeding might be fun, but it's not good for your health. It's not good for your insurance, and it's certainly not good for your criminal record.
Chris, one of the other things that you emphasized in your presentation was the importance of risk management and making risk management part of governance. And that's another
Indeed.
thing where I see lots of organizations, again, not just startups, but established companies. They don't like to think about it because they think that's negative. We need to keep a positive attitude, and they don't do the appropriate risk assessments and planning and responses. So again, not sexy. But how do you survive
Indeed.
without that?
Indeed. First off, you take a step back and hope that you're, and hope and pray you're not, what was it? I think it's Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill forever. But speaking of being at the top of the hill, that a lot of this has to start at the top. A lot of this is related to the culture of that organization, whether or not it's a 10,000 employee enterprise or a one employee enterprise. A mindset change really has to start at the top with the executive communicating that it is wiser to be that second driver does help in that conversation. But ultimately, to make it really clear that being realistic with your employees, with your clients, with your investors, with your community, with regulators is always going to be more valued in the long term than anybody who completely has a everything's roses, everything's perfect mindset. And the moment something hits the fan, as this is it always will in life, suddenly they don't have an answer. Suddenly everybody's, I thought everything was perfect. Where'd this come from? How'd this come out of nowhere? Did you know? Why didn't you know? If you don't want to just be a CEO that's a deer in the headlights, it's important to be realistic that these are the risks that we're looking at. These are the concerns that we have. These are the gaps that there might be. These are mitigations that we're taking. And truly, even at the larger levels, financially, failure to disclose things like that is a risk and is, especially for in SEC filings, is a statutory requirement for public companies. So anybody who's not in that spot, they don't necessarily get that lesson until it's too late. But it's very important for that to be continue to beat that drum. I encourage you. There's at least two of us. I would count everybody on this call. There's at least five of us who would also beat that drum right there with you. So I would say just continue to communicate that there's value in being realistic. There's an expectation in being realistic and being honest. And ultimately, there's a payoff for having a better, more intentional, a little bit more, slightly more cautious posture than your competitors. And that's more trust in the leadership and in the brand. And that's hard to buy. Indeed. Does that answer your question?
Doesn't completely answer my question, but it gives a framework to show that it's a valid question.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think it's probably fair to say that may be an open question, and there are many different ways to try to solve it. So at least here's a framework to help try to address that on a case by case basis, because that's
Mm-hmm.
probably, again, a case that needs to be made to every client you come across.
Chris, just another question, just because I obviously we want to take a methodical approach, right? But then again, like I keep going back, harping on how competitive this landscape is, especially now with AI. Moore's law is out the window, right? And so I'm just wondering, from a standpoint as far as
Oh boy.
timelines, because we're in the first phase, we're gonna be looking to go some timelines for when we start developing the AI, and I'm wondering like what are some realistic timelines. If we really wanted to take this on and really wanted to implement this ISO IEC certification and kind of
For
be,
2001.
yeah, for 2001, like framework, like what's some realistic timelines for like a small startup team? I'm not talking like a big organization where we're scrappy startups. So like,
Indeed.
what are some timelines that you like will be realistic for a small group that's just really
Mhm.
trying to get this going?
No, that's an awesome question. That actually probably would have been great in right in there in that presentation. Thank you for mentioning that. So one of the things, this is actually a perfect time as a startup is a perfect time to have a mindset toward being standards compliant. having a governance system in place because everything's new. There's nothing to unlearn. There's nothing to correct. There's a fellow, actually, Lama Allen is another fellow and colleague in the AI space. And one of the phrases he likes to use is too stupid to fail. And what that means is that you have nothing traditional you have to unlearn that tells you can't do this. And in a startup environment, designing as you're beginning to design your operations, as you're beginning to have an idea of what it takes to achieve what you want to achieve, this is the perfect time to say, hey, there are some guardrails we can have as part of this. As I think about what this operational stack is, let me also add guardrails to this conversation. And in a startup environment, I would say it might be realistic to sit down with a perhaps an ISO 42001 implementation partner, someone who might get you audit ready, and spend maybe 2 to 4 weeks just working on that and get all the bones of that framework in place. If you wanted to actually be 42001 audited and actually have that ISO seal, that's a more involved process, and that is a more capital intensive process. It's reasonable to wait a little bit before getting the seal, but to sit down and engage with a consultant, to engage with a partner and say, hey, let's actually look about being ready. Let's have a conversation about ensuring that those policies, those practices, those procedures are in place around our AI system, that we have a good AI management system in place. Yeah, I'd say that may be as simple as let's look at your planning of your operations and see what can be aligned to the standard. Let's put some policy frameworks, some policy templates in place so that you have them there so that you can start to think this way on a regular basis. And as you start to build up some of your operations and you start to tick some of those boxes, you can say, hey, we were 42001 ready from the get-go. The only box we have to tick is just having the auditor come in and verify everything because we've been collecting the evidence, we've been implementing the controls, we've been adhering to the standard. We're ready to rock. We're eating, sleeping, and breathing this.
Well, that's very helpful. Now you said it's very capital intensive to go through that process, right, to get a certification. Like, what are some
Yeah.
ranges we can expect for that as far as for a startup? Like, what should allocate potentially financially? What
Great
do you think?
question.
Yeah.
This varies depending on organization size and time that an auditor takes. More often than not, these auditors need to make an on-site appearance or a continuous virtual appearance. They usually spend time going through. So if you've never done GRC, implemented a GRC related framework before, one of the things that's necessary is for you to collect evidence of the controls that you've implemented and to verify that of every single step along the way. And a smaller organization, this is fairly easy to do. On a larger organization, this may be checking logs, this may be checking employee sign-offs, this may be checking records. Sometimes this involves going on site and checking those same records and making sure that not just checking the records, but testing that same evidence of that implementation of that particular control. Traditionally, audits can be very expensive in order to get that certification. We're talking easily a couple $1,000s a day. And these auditors usually are on site for at least a week. In a small business environment, say if you're already on point, you've already implemented all this, I would say you're probably looking at, depending on the auditor, because they may be able to don't hold me to this, they may be able to knock this out in 1 to 3 days. You may be looking at about 15K, give or take.
Okay.
Again, that depends on a lot. That depends on that particular auditor. That depends on your operations and whether or not you've really been walking the walk and talking the talk this whole time.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I have a question for the group. Has this been, and I'm going to go around and make sure we hear from everybody. Has this been a useful information for you? In fact, perhaps even cite one key thing that you learned. All right. Blama, you were just going, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you, has this been informative? Can you list one key thing that was valuable for you?
Yeah, this has been tremendously informative. I think this is just to be honest, I think this is just the beginning. I think this is like the shallow end of the pool as far as how deep you can go. But it's just opened up some different ideas for me. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is the idea of reframing the conversation around governance and getting this type of certification early on. As usually a misnomer, this is something that you do for bigger organizations that are more established, but how this could probably even fast track you if you start and initiate this process, especially with where AI is now, where everything is like very early. There are no certain hard guidelines or rules yet. It could position you and could be a market
Mhm.
advantage as far as how you position it with investors, stakeholders, and how you even begin to message yourself. I think it would be a competitive edge, I believe, after just hearing some of the
Yeah.
points that you brought up today.
Cool.
I can go
Fantastic.
next.
Please do.
All right.
Welcome, Eric.
Hello. First, thank you for this presentation. It was very helpful. I'd have to say, like, my biggest takeaway was the element about really understanding your AI and understanding like areas that might not, that could potentially be, that have the potential of causing a problem in the future. So, for instance, understanding different biases and then intentionally and like proactively putting a gatekeeper in those places to reduce the likelihood of, I guess, reduce the likelihood of something negative happening. And so for us, I think with some of
I think
the
getting off
data,
the guardrails. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So just we know like some of the limitations of the data set that we're going to use to train our AI. And so
Yeah.
thinking about the things like I just learned from what you just shared, just intentionally putting gatekeepers in those particular areas will be helpful. And I think that's a very practical thing that we could do.
Here. Fantastic. That sounds, you have it right on the money. All right. Next, Manny, how valuable was this to you? Was there a key thing that a valuable piece you were able to learn from this?
I would say that it's always good to have input. Circling back around to what Lemma, if I pronounced that correctly, was talking about actually the feedback you, Chris, gave him about competition. It's usually, I find, not a good idea to talk negatively about the competition rather than just personal business experience. Hey, we've had to go in and undo, redo, fix a rush job that a customer of mine had another vendor do. So you're still giving the example. And the other thing too is, yeah, there is this culture of rush. And a lot of times what I tell the customer is, do you want any solution or do you want the right solution? Because the right solution takes time. I can give you a quick solution, but you're not going to be happy with it. And that causes them to slow down a little bit. That's all I
Beautiful.
had.
That makes a lot of sense. For no, that's perfect. For what it's worth, by far and wide, I agree with not having a FUD sales process. When you're trying to wake people up from their stupor, as it were, sometimes you have to be extremely direct. But as a matter of course, no, it's introduce scenarios where it's clear what the negative impact was and how the solution, the positive place you're coming from, is clearly the more attractive solution. Yes. Just don't get it twisted. Don't say that. Let nobody come from this and say, Chris said I got to go and badmouth every competitor in my sector. No, please don't do that. Please don't do that.
A lot of time, business owners, when you talk in terms of cost, because they're very cost conscious or revenue conscious. So if if you can equate the message to dollars, so either increased revenue or loss of revenue, that's going to resonate more than getting into an argument about, how fast something goes, right? The example, a lot of times, so I had a conversation with somebody earlier today, and they were talking about how we were talking about some business inefficiencies because that's what we do. And they and I said, how much time does this person spend on this problem where it's affecting their productivity? Oh, it's only an hour a day. Okay, so every day? Yeah, every day. So 5 days a week. Okay. How many people you got
Yep.
doing this problem that you're experiencing this with? And they're like, oh, five people. Okay. So 5 people, 5 days a week, you're paying them on what? On average, what? $50,000 an hour a day? That's
That adds up.
$31,250 that's going down the drain. That's the cost of doing something too fast, too rush without getting all the information and doing your due diligence. And they're like, oh, holy crap. I'm like, yeah. Using that example, in 2 years, that's $62,500 in, yeah, yeah.
Indeed. All right. That makes perfect sense. And I would actually say that's actually a good takeaway. So Mimi will end with you and then I'll close this out. And that's actually a valuable point, Manny. So I'll even let you say that a valuable point you picked up, maybe what Manny said. All right. So Mimi, was this a valuable presentation for you? Was this a valuable discussion for you? And perhaps what was a key thing that you found that you learned that you found most valuable?
It was definitely helpful, and it was what I was looking for, which is like a real world context for the applications of AI. And I say my biggest takeaway is to learn more about the ISO standard. This is the second conversation I've had today about, actually, earlier I was talking about risk management, and they talked about the ISO standard for risk. So I like have to learn more about
Mhm.
ISO.
Indeed. For what it's
Thank you
worth,
for
that's
this.
you're in the right spot. I will put a couple links in chat now, and bear with me. All right, here we go. One, I would say that, there we go. We did a presentation. One of our first presentations was actually on the finer points of 42001. So our video library is accessible inside of the community portal. It's not the easiest to browse. There are lists of posts. There should be one going back to the first one we had, which was a few weeks ago. If you don't see it, let me know. In fact, I may send a link to it to you directly. If you are not yet a member of this community, I encourage anyone here and anyone on the replay to go ahead and click the sign up link that is either in chat or in the description below. As such, for everybody who has been here or as soon as you watch this, there's a link to a feedback form or survey that should take about 5 to 7 minutes to complete. And I strongly encourage you to complete that. That will be a humongous help to all of us, to me personally. So without further ado, and of course, without further ado, one of the last things I'll leave you with, if you have any further questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out, jump in the community, ask us questions there, book a consultation with us. In fact, I will put my personal meeting link in the chat right now. A number of you who I've already spoken to before, my calendar remains open. Please feel free to jump on to at any time. Type this in. There we go. And that's the personal link to that's the link to my personal calendar. So we're actually running a little bit over time. I want to be very respectful of everybody's time. So we are dismissed. If you have any other follow-up questions, you can I'll still hang on for a couple minutes to answer them. Otherwise, again, thank you so much for joining me this evening, for being part of this community and engaging in this conversation. We hope to see you out there. We hope to be able to assist you in whatever intentional AI that you're designing, developing, and deploying. And even if we can't, we hope that the information you've given us has enabled you to build more intentional AI systems. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Chris. Very good.
Thank you, Paula. Appreciate you.
Hey,
Thank
Chris,
you.
did you want to meet for a half hour or an hour? I just want to send you the right link for connecting.
An hour, if you have the time.
Okay, just put the link in the chat and you can just book something to your convenience. How's that?
That works.
All right, let me find the link. I'll put it in the chat right now.
All right, guys.
All right. Take care, Bella. Take care, Mimi.
Bye.
Take care.
I don't know why I can't find that link. What's wrong with me? All right.
All right, take your time.
Yeah, there we go. Copy link.